Nothing ever goes away until it teaches you what you need to know. I thought that was pretty cool with us talking about sponsor and talking about inventory and everything, how everything does happen for a reason. And it's because we learn from it. Spiritual inventory part 1 is based off of principle 4. We openly examine and confess our faults to myself, to God, and to someone I trust. Happy are the pure in heart, Matthew 5:8. It's also built off of step 4. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord, Lamentations 3:40. Oh. Tonight, those of you who've been through spiritual inventory parts 1 and part 2, they have a lot of questions that we go through, because this is the part where we're building up to actually start our inventories. So as I go through these questions, I just don't want to read them off and just read kind of what CR said. I'm going to put some of the stuff that I answered whenever I originally did this. So, I'm going to get a little personal and just bear with me through it. But tonight we're going to begin the first of 2 lessons. And I understand why they break up spiritual inventory into 2, because it's a lot. And this is the beginning of our inventory. And as we go through this, and as you work this step, I tell everybody, start writing names, start taking notes, because the questions that they're about to ask you, it's going to help you build. If you are a column person, like I said, it'll help you start to build your columns. But if not, it's going to help you start to gather your thoughts. So this is really where we always say we got to come clean. This is where it really starts, because we're going to start to openly examine. And a lot of people, it's hard to confess to themselves what they've done. A lot of people can easily talk about it. A lot of people can say, oh, I give that to God. But most of the guys, whenever I do a step study, right here, it's themselves that they really struggle with. It's kind of like whenever you go to the doctor, you have tests run. Well, the way technology is, I have my test results on my phone before the doctor does. And it's like, do I look at it? Well, yeah. Then what happens? You jump on Google and you find out, oh man, this could be cancer. It's like going on WebMD and typing in a headache and a rash, and you having heart failure. But whenever you do that, you do learn the good news of those results along with the bad news. And that's what we're trying to do right here. We're trying to keep everything balanced to where we can look at the good and the bad. God's word, we started in the beginning. It says, search me, O Lord, and know my heart. Test my thoughts. Point out anything you find in me that makes you sad, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. I'm not going to lie to y'all, and I've said this before, that is a very dangerous prayer to pray, because whenever you tell God, take things away from me that's not healthy, you'll lose people, you'll lose places, you'll lose things. It could be your favorite band of all time, and one day you're just like, yeah, I can't listen to that no more. So just be prepared whenever you start to make declarations that stuff happens. I said that in a small group one night, and all of a sudden there was like 3 of my best friends I grew up with. We haven't really talked much. It's like they weren't healthy for me. We weren't healthy for each other. So, but until last week, I was really sticking with the lessons. Last week I just kind of went off. But this one right here, I'm going to stay with it, because the questions they're going to start to ask in a little bit, they're kind of tough to answer. And it really makes you look inside yourself. So the first thing we want to talk about is our character. Every once in a while, we see something that just doesn't look right. And most of the time, we may see somebody acting out of character, as we say. But whenever we start to break this down, there's 3 types of character. There's the character that we exhibit. That's what the public sees. This is what we show the world. It normally fits all social norms. Our politics always line up with other people we're talking to. Our halo is straight and everything is perfect. Our life is always rainbows and unicorns. But then we have the character that we think we have, and that's our self-perception. Everybody just adores us. We're the backbone of everything. Nothing can go right unless we're there. People think that you're the best thing since sliced bread, and the world is all at peace. And both of those characters have something in common, and it's pride. And we have to watch that. Because whenever we only see the good things and not one bad thing, it's going to make us believe that everybody else only sees that also. And then we have the character that we truly have. Like they say in Opelousas, who we really be. It's hard to really sit down and look at yourself and say, who am I truly? Because you can list a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. But what ends up happening right here is we always go to the bad things of who you truly are. So your character plays a huge role whenever you start to move forth with your inventory, because you have to be at that point to where you're ready to accept things. And each one of those qualities, they play a role in who you are. Who we think we are, who we exhibit, and if and who we can cry out to help for. And sometimes you just want to be you. You don't want to have to put on a mask. You just want to sit around a table with a bunch of people, and if y'all want to cut up, just cut up and be yourself. Be really who God made you to be. So tonight we're going to look at some of the bad things and some of our character shortcomings or sins that can block us from receiving all the joy that God has intended. We're going to work on 4 areas of character tonight and 4 more areas. Wow, I'm in a different country now. Areas in our next section. This exercise, like I said, is just here to mainly jumpstart you getting your inventory done. So we start off in Matthew, where Jesus tells us to forgive us our sins, just as we have forgiven those who have sinned against us. Don't bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So whenever we read that, we got to start asking ourselves some of these hard questions. And the first part is going to be our relationship with others. The first hard thing to do when you're doing your inventory, who hurt me? We always want to start there. Who hurt me? And that question a lot of times is actually easier if you say, who hasn't hurt me? Because, some of us grew up in abusive relationships or just an abusive household around family. And it's like, who in my family hasn't hurt me? It would be a lot easier to answer that sometimes. I have family, best friends. I have total strangers, teachers, pastors, priests. Even I've talked about Miss Cynthia at Walmart already, how me and her just don't get along. She doesn't work there no more. But when our eyes lock, I'll go stand in the longest line. We just never got along because we got into it that one day and I held resentment against her. But those are the type of hurts that we're starting to look for right here. We're starting to look for the physical, the mental, the grief, the shame, the guilt, and the resentment. Whenever we start asking asking ourselves who hurt us. Because if we're holding resentment against somebody, there's a reason. Probably because that they hurt us at some point. We also have to ask ourselves who we're holding a grudge against. I'll be honest, I still harbor I wouldn't really call it a grudge, but I still harbor some feelings against some people that hurt me growing up. I continue to do that because, as we said earlier, it's just not safe. They're not safe people. It's not going to come out good if I try to make amends with them. If we try to get it's just not going to come out good. So I have to watch that grudge where it doesn't turn into, bitterness. But the way I deal with it is a lot of times I just tell myself I can't change them. They can only fix themselves. Like people told me when I was in my addiction. Nobody can help Brian. He has to want to help himself. But I can keep up a boundary to where, I'm never left alone with these people, or I'm social with them in a crowd or a gathering, but never one-on-one. We also have to see who we are seeking revenge. And, we get older and it's like, it sounds stupid. I'm going to get revenge on someone, but you'd be amazed how many people harbor that. It is someone, we have a tendency to say, well, I just hope they get what they deserve. That's your wanting revenge. You're wanting them to feel the same pain that you felt. Some people call it karma, and I get a kick out of that, But if you still have to be around these people and see these people, that's where it becomes hard, because you just want to see them. You want them to recognize what they did to you. And a lot of times it's not going to happen. And I can promise you that, because a lot of times we won't recognize what we did to other people. So again, we have to turn that into ourselves, and we have to look at that. And sometimes we got to take our own medicine. We got to say, all right, if I want this to work out, I need to go work on myself. Are you jealous of anyone? Every time I ask this in a men's group, they're like, no. I'm like, everybody's jealous of someone or something. That's in our nature. We have a sinful nature. It's just period. Bible tells us that. If you believe God's word, we all fall short of heaven, you know. But the ones that we allow God into those battles, it normally comes out a lot better. But me, I was hard head. I fought them on my own. You know, I never got that moment of instant healing that some has gotten. You know, I would walk into situations high thinking it was going to help me, but really I was jealous of the relationship they had with their family, or I was jealous because they had Mimo still. I didn't know my grandparents. I had 6 of them. I didn't know any of them. You know, I don't know half of my family. I pick at Sherry all the time. You know, it's like a graduation card. And I'm like, whose kid is this? Because we're not close. So a lot of that addiction growing up was rooted in jealousy, because it's like, why should they have everything nice and not me? Have you tried to justify your bad attitude by saying it's their fault? I've done it. And I've done it recently, you know. Um, it's like you start to put in all the work on this. And then whenever you don't get the results you do with someone, or you go to make that amends with someone and you shouldn't expect anything back, but you don't get anything back, oh, it's their fault. They're not ready to come around. That's not what it is. You know, our feelings have to start to change, because we have to understand that they have their faults and we have our own faults. And most of the time when you make an amends with someone, it doesn't matter what was done. A lot of times you're thinking the same way they are. You're making the amends. Most people that you know, in the STEP study, they say, well, my sponsor said I have to. When you're ready. There's no time limit on that. But we get into that, it's their fault, because a lot of times we're pushed into that to want to forgive and go past something whenever it's not time yet. You know, Hosea 4:4 tells us, don't point the finger at someone else and try to pass the blame. Then we have to ask ourselves, who have we hurt? Sherry, Tyler, Trevor, probably 99.8% of my family, because I think I only talked to 2 people left. You know, I've hurt friends. I've hurt complete strangers. You know, I'm far from perfect, but I can't use that as an excuse. Say, well, you know, I'm just not perfect, so I can be a jerk. No. So whenever you start to ask yourself, who did you hurt? And then you just went through that earlier part of people, you know, you might be jealous of, you're going to start to see a commonality between that. Then you have to ask yourself, how did you hurt them? Because you're wanting to know, well, why they did to me what they did. You know, it's like I got set up for failure. That was my biggest thing. Well, I set them up for failure to get even with them. You know, they taught me how to do things, but they never would teach me the importance of why I had to do them. It was just do them or else. And anytime anybody's fighting any type of depression, anxiety, or even addiction, that or else, that don't do nothing. You know, I don't know if the things I did was intentional, but I had to get to a point to where I had to accept I was responsible for them. And I had to deal with that on my side first before going trying to make amends with someone. I had to make sure I was ready. I was there ready. It says, who have you been critical or gossiped about? This right here too. I had one guy in a STEP study one time. He says, oh, I'm not critical or gossip of anyone. I'm like, dude, lightning going to hit you. Because we all are. I'm not saying we gossip. But whenever I start to talk, whenever I say gossip, it's not that you jump in it. Whenever they say, oh, so-and-so did this, you entertained it, you listened to it, you didn't try to stop it. That's gossiping. I had to learn that the hard way. I had a brother really sit me down and tell me, you know, I love you, right? And you know that's going to hurt. He's like, look, I know you're not saying anything, but you're entertaining it. And once I understood that, it was like, oh, so I am involved in that. It makes you critical of other people. James 1:26 tells us to keep a tight rein on our tongues. And that's hard, especially when you're going through recovery. I think we also need to keep the tight rein on our ears also, because those of us that are new to recovery, it's important that we learn not to tolerate that. Telling someone that you don't want to hear it may seem rude, but at the time, it may save someone else from being hurt, or it may save you from being hurt. A lot of times you hear people talking, and hey, they're putting someone down for something they did, and then you stop and think, dude, I did the same thing. So it can set you back in your own. Imagine a horrible rumor being spread about you. The first thing you want to know is who started it, because that's the person you're going to get. It's not the person that really started the rumors, all the ones that entertained it. It should be all the ones at church that knew your character that should have came up to you. And that's hard to do. Say, hey, look, just want to let you know this is going on. When we first started coming to this church, somebody came up to us and said, we just want to let you know what's going on. That was hard for them to do. But it's like, look, it's a bunch of crap. Don't worry about it. But we'd rather you hear it from us. That was hard for them. And I appreciate that, because it really showed me a lot of people's heart, But you speak from experience whenever that happens. The next setting that they have is your priorities in your life. Our priorities are always jumbled, and they're useless because we never prioritize what comes before other things. If we're going to sit down, we're going to say, I want this to happen. This is my priority. My priority is to never drink Dr. Pepper again. I need to quit going to McDonald's. Seriously. But no, when you're going to go, you get the fries, and I want a Dr. Pepper, So priorities, like I said, they're useless because we tend to always take our priorities and just bend them to make it meet us where we really want to be. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the priorities in our life? Like me, I want to provide for my family. I want to help others. I want to take care of my well-being. But again, that Dr. Pepper gets me every time. I want to be able to answer that phone at 2 a.m. whenever it rings. We talked about that a lot. Someone reaching out at 2 a.m. done called 15 people, and you pick up the phone. God wanted you to talk to them. I want to be able to be that person, and I always want to leave room for carrot cake too. A lot of people, that's all you're going to eat? They got cake up there. Yeah, that's all I'm going to eat. But Matthew tells us that he will give it to you if you give him first place in your life and live as he wants you to live. Live as he wants you to. And we have to remember, we're not all perfect. Like I said, we all fall short of the glory of God. But through Jesus, we're forgiven. So do not ever think that if you have a failure or a setback and your priority gets a little jumbled, that there's no way out of it. There's always a way back. After making the decision to turn your life and your will over to God, what areas of your life are you still not putting God first? This helps in your inventory right here, because now you're starting to put yourself in perspective. I hate that person. Every time I go over there, all we do is argue. You shouldn't be going over there. If you put the will of God first, you won't be over there. I heard a lot of people say that they take a whole different way to work that's a 30, 40 minutes out of the way because they would pass right in front of their old drug dealer's house. So again, me, I still struggle with our finances at times. I worry about the cost of everything going up instead of seeing that God is still providing. Gas went up. Y'all know groceries went up. Right before all that hit, God was like, you're getting a promotion, you're getting a raise. He knew it was coming. He had it in the bank for me. But I don't look at that. I get all grumbly when I see I'm paying $4 for a gallon of gas that I used to pay $2 for. So I have to stop to think about that. Even in my prayer life, sometimes I tend to rush through if there's something I want to get started on. Like on a Saturday, I want to get up, I want to cut the grass, I got to get the clothes done. Sherry's at work, I got to get something. And I tend to rush through my hour of prayer time in the morning, condense that to 15 minutes. And then what happens that afternoon? I got all that done, and I got the remote control in my hand, and HBO Max is on, and I'm going to sit down and binge something stupidly. But I cut God out of my morning. The biggest thing is I didn't put God first in directing me on what to do or where to go. I just said, this is my schedule. I'm sticking to my schedule. As y'all know, that's why I have them chips, because of my busyness, is because I have to have everything planned out. What in your past is interfering with you doing God's will? Sherry will agree with me here. It's my stubbornness. I want things right now. I don't want to wait, and I want it my way. We know God don't work that way. He's going to give you what you need, but it's not ever going to be the way that you thought you would get it. And then it's like, once I get it, yeah, but that's not what I want, so I put it on hold. So that's my stubbornness. That's what interferes with me a lot of times doing God's will. People ask me to do things. I'm like, yeah, I ain't doing that. I'm quick to say that. I don't want to do it. I'll think of 1,000 reasons not to do it. Oh, I'm busy. And what happens? I have the remote in my hand on that Saturday. We have to talk about your ambition. My ambition gets in the way because I get excited about something and I expect everybody to be as excited about it as I am. My want sometimes overrides others. And I think we all can relate to that sometimes. We get a new promotion, or we get involved with a new nonprofit, or like we do in a Burgers and Blessings. I get gung-ho with it. I expect everybody else, and it's like, no, everybody else isn't going to be happy to be out there on a Saturday morning when it's hot. Even though ice cream is free, it doesn't matter. But you'll be there. But, I have to stop and I have to think that, when they bought that new Jeep, I wasn't that excited. Bob bought that new bike. I really wasn't that excited. And he was like, man, come see my new bike. And I was like, okay, I'll go look at it. But then again, you see how that card has two sides on it. We have to look at your pleasures. And I stop right here all the time, especially in step studies. Because I tell them, I said, everybody has a guilty pleasure, and they all look at me. I said, if all of y'all were to open up Spotify right now and go through your playlist, you'll probably find about 10 songs that's your guilty little pleasure on your playlist. We all have them. I have a lot of them. At one time, I had Britney Spears, and I'd drive down the road, and I'd scream. We have these little guilty pleasures. So, yeah, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't. It really wasn't. Kelly Clarkson. I mean, there's a lot of music like that. It was like my guilty little pleasures. But whenever, you huh?
What about Blake?
Who?
Blake Shelton.
No country. My country music stops probably
Kelly
when.
Clarkson does country.
Yeah, but no, she got more rock than that.
Uh-oh.
But I never cared for the new country, so my country stops about right there. But one guy told me one time that the only guilty pleasure he had was hot fudge sundaes. And I told, and he was struggling over something else. And I told him, I said, dude, you just said your biggest struggle is a hot fudge sundae. I would kill for that hot fudge sundae. And it made him kind of realize, well, yeah, I'm worried about that, but this over here. So kind of dig in and really look at your guilty pleasures, and I'm not talking about sinful pleasures. I'm just talking about guilty pleasures. A lot of people every morning, they got to have the Starbucks. That one woman was paying $15 for a cup of coffee. I'm like, I get upset at $7 a Jet for my Cajun, but it's like $15 for a cup of coffee. I don't know what's in it, but it's crazy, because Proverbs 21:17, it warns us. It says, he who loves pleasure will become poor. If you're pumping out $15 a day for a cup of coffee, you're going to become poor quick, especially with the price of gas the way it is. The weird thing that I ask some people, though, is, do you find pleasure in Jesus? My answers are always mixed right here. And I tell them, Psalm 16:11 tells us, you will teach me how to live a holy life. Being with you will fill me with joy. At your right hand, I will find pleasure forever. It's hard for us to say that we find all of our pleasures in Christ because of the world. So again, we have the good and we have the bad, and we have to start to balance that, Sit down and ask yourself, when was the last time you truly found pleasure in the Lord? I'm not going to lie, for me, it's been a while. It's been quite a while since I just found that man, I just felt the joy. It's been a while, but that's my fault because I rushed through my prayer times in the morning. What have been your priorities in your job? You know, I work in Opelousas. I tell them my top priority is not to get shot. There's a lot of shootings in Opelousas. My other priority is I'll run a complex with 45 units, and that's 45 broken families in there. Out of everyone in there, there is not a mother, father, and children living in there. None of them have that. It's the dad with the kids, the mama with the kids, the one kid that's in the gang, the other kids that's selling drugs. So when I look at that priority, it's like I have to understand that God placed me there for a reason. You know, I always say I've been called to help the broken and the beaten and the damned, and look where he put me, in Opelousas of all places, in St. Landry Parish. You know, what about the priorities in your friendship? You know, it's hard to keep a true friendship. It really is, especially when you're struggling. Even if you're just going through depression. Because honestly, some people, they just, bro, I don't want to be around. They always, man, they're Debbie Downers. I don't want to be around them. So whenever you look at that, and I look at that, I've poisoned so many friendships in the past. Is whenever I go back home to Crowley and I'm passing through Walmart to pick up something on the way home, and I see somebody I know, I have to stop and think, the last time we talked, did I get them mad? Because I'm being honest, I have messed up so many relationships when it comes to my friendships. And then if we get back into the high school years, I don't remember a lot of that. So it's like, what are they going to tell me that I don't even remember I did? So we have to be aware of that. Our personal goals. To be the person I needed when I needed that person. You hear me say that a lot. That is my personal goal. To always be that person to somebody whenever I needed that person. That's a lot easier to do than what you think. You know, it's to pick up that phone at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're deep in conspiracy, and it's like, yeah, cats with 10 hats. I get it, you know, and I've had those conversations with people. But then I had to stop and remember whenever I got chunked out the house and I was by myself in New Iberia and I only had 2 people to talk to, those 2 people were there for me. So I need to be that person. You know, it should truly be a personal goal. But then you have to stop and think, you know, what about the ones that are just self-centered and self-serving? We all have those people in our lives also. Those provide protection, and there's nothing wrong with having them around you. But you have to remind, because having people like that around you also remind you that you need to continue to work on yourself. You know, a lot of people's like, I came to Jesus. You still have that Metallica shirt on. I can't be around you no more. That's like a smoker. Always, when I quit smoking, I picked at everybody. The worst person to be around is someone that quit smoking because they don't want no one to smoke. I could be around alcohol. I go to concerts. They're smoking weed. I have no want for that. But when I first quit smoking, oh, nobody could smoke around me. So it's like, you know, you just recently quit, so you know how hard it is. So it's like, but having those people around you also build growth in you, and it builds strength in you because it'll turn you into a totally different person. It's going to show you that these priorities that you put upon yourself, they're not a burden, because you can always adjust your priorities. You know, I want it to be stripping the floor tomorrow, but that ain't going to happen. I'm going to have to wait till Thursday. Well, that's fine. I can adjust that. I can always tweak that. But we have to ask, what did that priority affect? And the answer is everyone. Sherry used to tell our boys all the time, what you do today affects you tomorrow. And she never thought I was listening to that, but it makes a lot of sense, because if you do something dumb today and you wake up tomorrow, you're going to pay for tomorrow what you did for today. And I'm not talking about addiction. I'm not talking about a relapse or anything like that. I'm talking about just doing something that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. My kids, they were good boys. They would go sleep at the friend's house. They'd pull the trampoline up to the fence and they'd jump on the trampoline and shoot airsoft rifles across the fence to the other people. And it's like, you take someone's eye out today, you're going to be paying for that eye tomorrow. So we have to stop, and we have to, whenever we set our priorities, make sure it doesn't affect anyone else. We don't want to step on someone just to get what we want. We have to ask ourselves what's good about it. You know, what's good about our priorities? The main thing is that you have them. Doesn't matter where your priority is. The object is you have them. And a lot of times they can be wholesome and they can be refreshing, because you'll see in 4 weeks, whenever you wanted to do this 4 weeks ago, and now you're doing it every day. But you also have to look to see what was wrong with them. And sometimes what's wrong with your priorities is that you actually have them, but you don't have them set in the right way. You know, I'm very tough on myself all the time. I never expect a lot out of people. Because my thing growing up was everybody would, they were like, Brian, you're this and you're that. And I said, if you wouldn't expect so much out of me, I wouldn't let you down. And that was my comeback to everything. It's like, you expect me to be sober on New Year's. Bruh, really? It's New Year's. There's certain holidays of the years. So I had to stop when I got here. I had to actually stop and I had to reapply that on the other way. I can't expect a lot out of somebody, especially if I'm not willing to put in that same amount of work to fix myself. This is the area where it gets sticky. Our attitudes. We all have attitudes. So I wanted to know exactly what makes up our attitude. The first thing I came up with was our beliefs and our thoughts. This is where your wisdom and your expectations meet. You feel a certain way to do a certain thing. I got friends that get up every morning at 3 a.m. They go to Cajun Fitness. They work out for 3 hours. They take a shower. They go to work for 8 hours. And then they come home and they're like, man, I love that. And I'm like, that ain't my belief. That's not my thought. But just because it's not my belief doesn't mean if they're happy with it. Most people do that to keep themselves busy so they don't get in any trouble. I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I get home at 5 o'clock. By 15 to 6, I have done eating, taken a shower, and I'm in my bed. I might not go to sleep till 9, 10 o'clock, but I'm laying down. When I was growing up, they used to tell me all the time, you're sleeping your life away. They lied. No, because you get older and you don't get none of that sleep back. So no. Another thing that makes up our attitudes is our feelings and the emotions. I'm watching a series. I'm not going to say what it is, but listen to this. All right. Our feelings and our emotions make up our attitudes. This is what I heard. It says people do not do drugs to numb their emotions. They do them so they have control over their feelings. And I was like, okay. So then the person said, you don't believe me? Why are so many people on antidepressants? That hit me. That made me realize all them years of drug addiction, all them years of drinking, I wasn't trying to numb that emotion. I wanted to control the feeling that I had. So that made up a big attitude. When people would tell me, hey, you can't do that, my attitude was, yeah, but I'm happy. So we put those together. Also in our attitudes, there's actions and intentions. Our intentions will always influence our actions. Intentions are mental goals that pop up in your head within a second without even thinking sometimes. Your action will determine if the intention was good or not. You're going down the road, you're going down the interstate, you see the sign that says left lane closed ahead, you get in the right lane, you see the car come flying. Your first intention, he ain't getting in front of me.
Do that all the time.
All the time, but it's your action, because whenever you're going to speed up on the side, you're going to do like I did on Verot, and I ran that man off the road because my intentions overrode my actions. Ephesians 4:31 tells us to get rid of all bitterness, passion, and anger. No more shouting or insults, no more hateful feelings of any sort. I was supposed to flip that right there. But again, the intentions, and I have to explain that to a lot of people, especially if they're new to God. And I'm going to say it like that. We'll start a step study. They may have done a step study in AA, but they never had that God connection. And I have to tell them that. And they say, man, all these things pop up in my mind. I'm like, the sin isn't what's popping in your mind. The sin is if you act on them. So they go real close. The phrase in recovery that I hate, do you have An attitude of gratitude. I never did like that phrase, but I understand why. Do you always find yourself complaining about your circumstances? And to be honest, yeah, we do something stupid and we get, what would Jesus do? He wouldn't have got himself in that in the first place. He would have caught himself before he done it. But I have to stop and I have to be thankful because I didn't go any farther. I had to learn in an attitude of gratitude that sometimes my best blessings were unanswered prayers. And it's a lot. When I first started doing a step study, at first it was like, man, if I could go back and change all this. And I had to realize if God would have given me that, I wouldn't be here today. Probably wouldn't know any of you. So there's a reason behind everything. Also, in your attitude, you have to find out in what areas of your life are you ungrateful. Being ungrateful and taking things for granted often stem from a sense of entitlement, leading to damaged relationships, burnout, and emotional numbness. I take the peace, the provisions, and the favor from God. I take that for granted at times. Yeah, my car is going to start tomorrow. That thing needs an oil change. Yeah, but it's all right. It's good. But I take that favor. I always say my car runs on God's grace and Walmart's gas. But I take that favor for granted at times because when everything is going well, we forget about it. 1 Corinthians 15:57, it says, but thanks be to God. He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. The next thing with our attitude is, have you gotten angry or easily blown up on people? You can ask Sherry. I can lose my mind in a heartbeat, but I get it all out. If it's some spicy words I use, but I get it out. I'm not going to harbor it because if I harbor it, it's going to turn to bitterness. I tell y'all, I ain't been saved long. I still get very, very angry. It's like I can't throat punch them. I'm wearing a CR shirt. It look kind of bad. I could do all things in Christ and then just real quick right in the I can't do that. So, but we all get to that point. Go drive down Ambassador Caffrey. On the way over here, I was stopped way in Milton. I was like, oh, this can't be the dang traffic circle. I was losing my mind. The light turns green. I'm like, go people, let's roll. That turning lane don't stay, So even though you've progressed all this, you'll see you can easily still get angry and blow up at people. Are you sarcastic? Right? I have a very weird, dark sense of humor, and y'all will see me sometimes just walk away laughing because I don't want to say anything because it's going to be very sarcastic. A couple of weeks ago, I'm unlocking my door. I'm checking my box for where my money is, and I hear one of my tenants holler, all this wind is messing up my hair. It just came out my mouth. I said, well, take it off and fix it. And she stared at me and slowly slid the slipper off the end of her shoe, and I knew to get in my office. But she knows me. We clown like that all the time, and she tells me that. You're so sarcastic, but if nobody knows you, they'll think you're rude. I'm like, so I have to think sometimes because sarcasm can be a form of verbal abuse. I never looked at it that way, though. Because I have a lot of sarcasm in me when I talk about my recovery and my addiction. Because it's like I see how stupid I was and I have to laugh about it. I have to poke fun at myself because if not, I'm going to take it too seriously. And once you've reached freedom from that, you never want to go back. What in your past is still causing you fear and anxiety? Me, it's my health. A couple of years ago, I had a health scare. And I'm worried about taking care of Sherry. Someone had picked at me a while back. I passed by one of my tenants and she started doing this and looking at me. She picked at me. She says, you one Big Mac away from going to the hospital. She says, you've gained a lot of weight in the last 2 or 3 years since you know me. And she's sarcastic too. Me and her go back and forth. But I wasn't ugly with her, but it just made me realize that I still worry about my health. And then I stress eat about worrying about my health. It's not healthy. I have to work on that. I can't sit down and wipe out a bag of Doritos while I'm worried about, man, I might have a stroke. You know, when I went to my cardiologist for the first time, he gave me some nitroglycerin pills. And the first thing I did was text Pastor Lane and said, hey, I got some nitro, bro. Can we blow something up with it? And he's like, that's nothing to joke about. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's funny. But he had to tell me, no, Brian, that, you know, that's serious if he's giving you that. But my anxiety, it seems to pop up on me mainly when I'm not comfortable with my surroundings. You know, I can get up here, I can teach a lesson, I can teach on a Thursday night. Y'all, some of y'all see me on Sunday, and some of y'all have told me, you know, man, you look so comfortable. My anxiety is right here. And the first time I get up there to talk and my anxiety isn't here, I got to walk away from it. Just for the main reason, that anxiety is you're telling people stuff. You have to be clear. You know, I'm comfortable in that part of my anxiety. But yeah, I'll wipe out a Big Mac at 2 a.m. like it's nothing, you know. 1 John 4:18 tells us that there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. You know, I say there's only two reasons people end up in Celebrate Recovery or AA, NA, anything. It's fear and pride. You're too prideful to say you're scared, or you're too scared to say that you have pride. That's what it's boiled down to. And all the times I've done step studies and talked with people. And he's telling us right here, we can't have fear and be perfect in love. So it's something that we really have to start to mess with and start to think about. The last thing we're going to talk about tonight is integrity. We get to this part, and a lot of guys ask me, you know, they really don't understand what integrity is. I tell them, go read the book of Job. That'll show you what integrity really is. If you sit down and you read it, you will see how he was able to lament and complain and point fingers, but still keep it straight with God and keep his integrity. You know, Colossians 3:19 tells us, it says, do not lie to each other. You have left your old sinful lie and the things you did before. I have to remind myself all the time that when I came out of that water, when I was baptized, that I was a new person and that old sinful self wasn't there anymore. And he couldn't hold me down. And I still say to this day, that dude held me down a little bit longer than that he held down everybody else. But I have to remind myself all that time. That way, when I get caught in something or I see myself backtracking, I can say, hey, that's not you anymore. With our integrity, we have to ask ourselves, in what past dealings were you dishonest? You know, I had a lawn service. I had a lot of single moms. I had a lot of widows and widowers. I had a lot of men and women that were widowed. And I just had a lot of people just barely making it. And I'm not saying this to brag, but a lot of times when they would say how much to cut my grass, I could see that. And I would say, look, what's in your budget? All I got is $20. I'll do it every other week, $20. But then I roll up to a lawyer's house or a doctor's house. It's like, oh, he's got money, bro. Ain't no $20 here. But that's dishonest because I'm taking someone else's blessings for taking advantage of that. Robin Hood, yeah, he stole from the rich and gave to the poor, but that's still dishonest. It's still stealing. So whenever I thought I was actually helping people, I was being dishonest. And it hit me one day because I had a little old lady tell me that. She said, you know, I don't want to get in your business. I know what you charge me, but you charge them across the street more. I said, well, yes, ma'am. I said, their budget is different. No, that's not it. They got a Lexus in their driveway. And it hit me that day. And I was like, that is being dishonest. And then when I told her rate was going up, she says, oh, I don't like them people. She was quick. I don't like them people. So, but whenever you look at dishonesty on that way, you don't beat yourself up because you see that you were trying to do good. Have you stolen anything? Who hasn't? Who hasn't stolen a candy or stolen something? But whenever we ask this and it says, have you ever stolen anything? Everybody starts to list all these material things that they stole. I had a guy told me he stole a forklift. Another guy was like, man, he jacked a backhoe. And oh yeah, I mean, baby, you'd be amazed. Cocaine's a hell of a drug. You know, it makes you do things that you normally wouldn't do. And, you know, these guys, they stole cars, they stole everything. And after it was all over with, I said, what about stealing someone's feelings? And it just got quiet. I was like, what about taking their peace, taking someone's hallelujah, taking their sanity from them? I said, we never look at that whenever we look at what things we have stolen. We only tend to look at the material objects. That's where this question is really leading you to, though. What have you really stolen from someone that actually hurt them? You stole their car, it's insured. Yeah, you stole that backhoe from Patriot Construction Company, just say, that's insured. But what did you take that could never be replaced? And whenever I flip that question like that, it gets quiet. You know, have you ever exaggerated yourself to make yourself look better? I have. Because I, again, with that sarcasm, I have a tendency to exaggerate how my sobriety really hasn't been the struggle that I really had in the beginning. It's because I really don't remember the beginning of my sobriety. Because I didn't just wake up one morning and say, I ain't doing nothing. I did a lot of drugs, a lot. It's like, all right, I'm not gonna take any pain pills this week. You know, and I'm not gonna take no Xanax and Valium. I did a lot of pills, and it was like, all right, now I need to quit the coke, and I need to quit the drinking, I need to quit the smoking. So whenever I woke up and I finally said enough was enough that day, I really don't remember all of that. So when I talk to someone, it's like I tend to exaggerate what really wasn't that bad, because I don't remember laying in bed soaking wet, shaking for 3 days. Before I came back from Georgia, that was their biggest thing. They're like, you're not going home a junkie, man. You're going home sober. And they locked me up for a couple of days, and I went through detox, and it wasn't pretty. But I don't talk about that, because it's like I never want anyone to think, oh, well, man, if you went through that, I'm going to go through that. So I do tend to exaggerate on that. In what areas of your past have you used false humility? And I get asked every step study, what is that? And I tell them, I have to pull out my phone and Google it, because I'm not a bright man. I said, it's a manipulative, insincere display of modesty intended to hide pride, vanity, or gain admiration. I said, okay, Google, give me some examples. First thing that popped up is humble bragging. I'm so terrible at giving these lessons. Just so someone will say, no, dude, you're doing good. See, that's humble bragging. Excessive self-deprecation. Constantly tearing myself down just so I want to say, nah, man, yeah, you suck at that, but look how good you are over here. You know, that's part of that humility. Yeah, but you deflect your compliments. You know, you reject recognition for your achievements, and it's like, oh, really, it's nothing. I don't want anything, but, you know, you kind of like this at the same time, and it's like, yeah, bring it. You know, you perform humility publicly, acting humble, particularly in a religious or professional settings, to gain social validation or a reputation of holiness or righteousness. You know, Jesus was talking about when you fast. You don't put oil in your hair and you walk around all like that. That's part of it. You know, fishing for reassurance, portraying oneself as helpless, unworthy. You know, it's basically to trigger a validation. That's narcissism. You know, and a lot of people say, oh, I don't struggle with that. Everybody has a little bit, because everybody wants a pat on the back as a good job. Where it becomes a problem is every time you do something, you need a pat on the back. You know, and especially in a church setting, that gets old quick. You know, people see that. Have you ever pretended to live one way in front of your church Christian friends and another way at home and another way at work? Oh, yeah. I played a game called What Do You Meme with some of our Christian friends and watched them turn purple, because some of them answers ain't right. And I was like, oh, we need to take some of these out. I sat down on a Christmas and played Cards Against Humanity with my kids, and they're like, we're never playing this game with you again. You're sick. Something's wrong with you. And then, you know, one of my sons will look at me and says, but you going to church Sunday? I said, yeah, just because I'm not perfect don't mean I'm not welcomed, you know. So if ever you want to play them games, yeah, I'm not the person to play that with. Trust me. But this is where part one is going to stop. Next week, I'll do part two. In part two, we're going to look at our old ways of thinking in our minds. You know, the way we've been treated in mistreating God's temple. That's our bodies. This is what we're doing to ourselves. How we did or didn't walk by faith in the past are important. That past relationships, how we allow them to continue to affect our today families and also our church. As you start on this spiritual inventory, remember two things. First is in Isaiah. No matter how deep the stain of your sins, I can take it out, make you as clean as freshly fallen snow. And second, I can't say this enough. Keep your inventory balanced, man. I'm serious. Because in the beginning, that's why I wrote that book. Because it was like I had a hard time keeping it balanced. I was either mad or mad. It was the only two things that I had. I never could do anything right, and I never will. So it was real hard for me in the beginning. But as you start to go through this, take these easy things that you can give up right now and give to God. Give those quickly and easily. And then sit back and just wait. And you're going to see those little bitty easy things you gave up. God did so much with those little things. Then you can start to give away the hard and the big things, you know. The biggest thing about your attitude is as you go through recovery, or as you fight with your depression or your anxiety or your grief or anything, there has to be a sign of improvement, because it has to get to a point to where you got to start stepping out of your truth or what you think is true and start stepping into God's truth. And that is spiritual inventory. Like I said,